Chapter 116. Kale walked toward Pendrick, who was standing there without being able to say anything. Did you decide what you will do with Balbud? That. Difficult to decide. Pendrick nodded his head. The elven philosophy dictated that they should execute Balbud and the rest of the prisoners. However, it would be disappointing to execute them right away without gathering any information from them beforehand. I would like to make a suggestion. A suggestion? Kale started to smile toward Pendrick, who was confused but also had some expectations toward what Kale would say. Pendrick would definitely remember how Kale mentioned Arm and the Eastern Continent. Since this was new information that Kale did not share in front of the chief, Pendrick would want to gather more information like this, if possible. There are no other races like the elves that are so thorough with getting revenge. The elves considered them to be an elegant race that was better than other races. That was the reason they were not materialistic. They believed that living in nature without materialistic greed made them better than other races, like the humans. Maybe that was why, but the elves were thorough with making sure to get revenge on any enemies that chose to provoke them. In this aspect, the elves probably resembled dragons more than the dark elves. After all, the dragons were an even more arrogant race than the elves. Kale turned his gaze toward Balbud. B. Crocs was thoroughly tightening the chains on his arms and legs. What about passing Balbud off to someone else? Pendrick's expression became odd. This did not seem to be the result he had wanted. Do you mean pass him off to you, young Master Nim? The elves knew they had already asked a lot of Kale, but they were hoping that Kale would step in. The elf village currently did not have enough elementals to even restore the valley. Furthermore, they needed to be prepared in case the organization came back to attack again. Although they were lacking manpower, they also wanted to get their revenge. Pendrick held back his expectations and waited for Kale's response. He thought it would be good if Kale stepped in. You could not find such a righteous person anywhere in the world. No. Excuse me. However, a completely unexpected answer came out of Kale's mouth. If he was not going to take Balbud, who would? The confusion was clearly visible on Pendrick's face. I want you to first discuss my suggestion with the Chief Nim. I will give you the details if you all decide to go along with my suggestion. Will it be with a trustworthy person? Pendrick could see Kale nod his head without any hesitation. Yes, it is a trustworthy person. It was because Kale had the person's weakness in his hands. Kale recalled the video communication device that was stuck deep inside his magic bag. He had not had to think about it for a while. He was annoyed with the secret organization and hated them. However, he did not want to step up to deal with them. It was obvious that doing so would lead to a lot of headaches. So, think about it and give me an answer by this evening. I will be leaving tomorrow because there are things I still need to do. Pendrick observed Kale's back as Kale started to walk away after patting him on the shoulder. If it is someone such a righteous person can trust, wouldn't it be okay? He could not be certain about it, but Pendrick felt like he could trust Kale because Kale had stepped up once again for a situation where he had nothing to gain. Oh, one more thing. Yes. Kale turned back around and started to speak. Are you going to the Whipper Kingdom alone? Ah, yes sir. I believe that will be the case. Then let's go together. Excuse me. Kale gently smiled toward Pendrick. He thought that it would be better to have an elf from the elf village who had a connection with the gold dragon when they went to meet him. If possible, he wanted to take everyone that he could. Of course, he would be in the way back of their group, maybe even hiding behind Choi Han. The Whipper Kingdom is currently a dangerous place to move around alone. You'll be safe if you go with us. We have things to do there anyway. The current Whipper Kingdom was a mess. The Whipper Kingdom had been on a one-way train to hell ever since Tunka became the commander-in-chief last fall. Of course, none of the Whipper Kingdom's residents knew that they were headed for despair. Kale looked toward Pendrick, who had an apologetic look on his face. I can't burden you so much. No such thing. Stop thinking about such useless things. It'll probably be better so that you know where the prisoner ends up as well. Just think about it. Thank you very much. No need to thank me. Shouldn't we all help each other out? Pendrick started to smile. It looked even purer and brighter because his face was so handsome. Of course, Kale was paying more attention to B. Crocs, who was looking at him with an iffy look on his face. You are right. Young Master Nim, you are definitely right. Yes, everything I say is right. Kale played along with Pendrick using a joking tone before heading out of the underground prison. He could hear Pendrick speaking to him as he walked. I will discuss it with the chief as quickly as possible. That was exactly what Kale wanted. Kale started to walk faster. There was someone he needed to discuss this with as well. To be more specific, he needed to tell the person he planned on dumping Balbud on. Kale, who returned to the chief's house, immediately ordered Ra'an to check the surroundings. There were no bugs nor recording magic in the house, probably because they knew that Kale was with a dragon. Kale walked into the guest room that the chief had created for him and had his group guard the door. Ra'an. All right, human. Ra'an revealed himself in the air. Kale put the video communication device on the table and sat down on the couch. Ra'an started to connect the video communication device at Kala's signal. A person's face appeared on the device after a moment. Long time no see. It was Crown Prince Alberu. Alberu's eyes showed just the slightest bit of happiness to see Kale. Your Highness, you still remain the vibrant star in the hearts of the citizens. However, Alberu immediately started to frown after hearing Kala's greeting. What do you want from me now? You really understand me now? I am filled with me. Enough. Kale closed his mouth and started to smile. Alberu started to frown, as if he found Kala's smile to be disgusting. The two of them had not seen each other for about 3 months. They had nothing to discuss with each other since they chatted about the Whipper Kingdom 3 months ago. Are you contacting me about traveling to the Whipper Kingdom? Contrary to the frown on his face, Alberu's eyes were full of curiosity. It was because he knew what Kale was planning to sell at the Whipper Kingdom, as well as how he was going to do it. No. Unfortunately, it is not for that reason. Then? I managed to capture one of the members of the organization that caused the Plaza Terror incident. This swordsman seems to hold a mid to low tier position with the organization. Alberu blinked a few times to think about whether he heard Kale correctly. However, his eyes soon were filled with shock. How? No, never mind. That is not important. How, is important. We captured him in the Roan Kingdom. Alberu's expression quickly stiffened. Kale looked at Alberu's expression and started to think. He bit the bait. Alberu had bitten onto this information. Kale hoped to no longer have to deal with the secret organization. At the same time, he didn't want to be the one who took care of them himself. How could the son of a count fight against an organization that could rock the entire continent? It would be difficult, even with a dragon by his side. That was why Kale thought of this person. It was someone whom neither the secret organization nor the elves could easily touch, as well as someone who would take care of it even more thoroughly than himself. It was someone who had negative feelings about the organization and wanted to get rid of them. At the same time, it was someone whose weakness was in Kala's hands. It could be none other than our dear Crown Prince. I can tell you the details after the discussions are completed, however, we managed to catch this person around the Roan Kingdom's 10-Finger Mountains. And why are you telling me all this? Kale smiled instead of responding, while Alberu clicked his tongue and continued to speak. Hand him over to me. Yes, sir. Alberu continued to frown as if he found the way Kale answered to be annoying. You seem to pass all of the annoying things to me. Do you not like it? No, it's great. So great. Contrary to Alberu's frowning face, his eyes were clear. The Roan Kingdom had not managed to discover the identity of the organization. Not being able to find any answers after a year of investigation was humiliating for the kingdom. That was why Kale knew that Alberu would do anything and everything to gather information from Balbud. Alberu would also use Balbud to his advantage. Your Highness. Yes. You're going to put him to use, aren't you? Alberu started to smile as he asked. For what? Asking even though he knows exactly what I am talking about. Naturally, for the Empire. Ha, ha ha. Yes. I definitely will. The Empire still had not captured the secret organization and the Holy Twins that had killed the Pope. That fact did not sit well with Kale. The Empire claimed that they were fervently looking for the twins, however, having to deal with the Whipper Kingdom made it difficult for them to focus all of their attention on the search. At first glance, it might look like the Empire was taking their time in the search with the hope that the power of the Church of the Sun God would go down even more as time passes. However, this was an incident where hundreds of their citizens were killed as well. It is weird because the Imperial Prince is someone who cares a lot about saving face. It made no sense that the Empire had not figured anything out about the incident. The Empire even rejected the Roan Kingdom's offer to work together multiple times. That was why even Alberu was curious about what the Empire was doing. At the same time, Kala's train of thought was different. The Imperial Prince is someone who would set the jungle on fire to gain control. He also knows that the North will come down to invade, yet is instead waiting for the Roan Kingdom and the Brek Kingdom to lose strength while fighting the North. But such a person was leaving the secret organization alone? That made no sense. It had to be one of two reasons. Either the Empire wants to find the organization on their own in order to prove that they are better than everybody else. Or they have a secret relationship with ARM. There was something Kale had paid attention to while he was lounging around in Harris Village. Well, by paid attention, he gave some orders for others to do the work. Anyways, what Kale had done was get Ron to gather Frisia, the assassin posing as a sculptor, as well as others and create an information brigade. The Whipper Kingdom's Tunka will soon head to the Empire. Kale knew that the contents of Volume 5 were coming to an end soon. Of course, the story has twisted in many ways thanks to his interference. Tunka, who should have already been at war, was delayed, while the jungle was quickly becoming unified under Queen Litana's rule. I still have to do what I have to do. Kale still planned on going back to the Whipper Kingdom in order to profit. There were a lot of things to do once he got there. Hand the prisoner over to my aunt. Report everything that happens as well. Kale nodded his head as if that was obvious before he calmly continued on. Yes sir. Oh, I am also selling dead mana. What? There's a large amount of it, so I think I will need to sell it in the Dark Elf City. There is no discount. I will sell it to you at the market price. I also only accept cash. Alberu, who was looking at Kale in disbelief, slowly started to speak with a serious expression on his face. How much is it? I will sell it to you at a fair price, Your Highness. Kale safely concluded his dead mana deal, as well as the issue of Balbud with Alberu, who was still full of disbelief. They discussed everything for quite a while, but the results were satisfactory. Maybe that was why, but he didn't mind having a long discussion with Chief Canaria regarding Balbud later that evening. The next morning, Kale was standing in front of the still unconscious Balbud. Kale sat down on a chair and crossed his legs as he looked down toward Balbud. B. Crocs approached Balbud and asked. Should I wake him up, young Master Nim? Yes. B. Crocs grabbed Balbud's hair and splashed him with a bucket of water. Pendrick and the Guardian Knight who were standing behind Kale cautiously asked after seeing B. Crocs's actions. Are you going to tell him what is going to happen? Wouldn't it be better to take him while he is still unconscious? I'm not sure. I think it will be better to tell him at least some of it. Pendrick stopped talking after listening to Kala's relaxed response. Balbud was groaning as he started to come to his senses. The cold water did its job in waking him up. Kale stood up and took a step back as he quietly observed. He recalled the conversation he had with Chief Canaria last night. Young Master Nim, wouldn't the kingdom know about our village if we work with the Crown Prince? One of the conditions for the Crown Prince will be keeping this village a secret. Plus, isn't it difficult on your own? None of the other elf villages will help you. They will just focus on protecting their own branch from the World Tree, especially if you explain what happened. Pendrick was shocked at what Kale had said. Kale was aware of the fact that elves were selfish and had no sense of race relations. Pendrick noticed Balbud opening his eyes and looking toward Kale as he closed his mouth. Ugh, just what the hell? Balbud's voice was a mess thanks to the poison from the other day. Kale started to smile at Balbud, who barely managed to realize what was going on. Balbud bit down on his lips and glared at Kale. I don't like that look of yours. Kale sounded very calm as he frowned about Balbud's gaze. That calmness made Balbud even more anxious as he started to speak. What did you do to me? Nothing yet. But there is a lot planned from now on. The phrase, from now on, made Balbud's shoulders slightly shake. However, the man looking down at him, Kale, continued to speak in his casual tone. You will leave this elf village with me. Your life will be in my hands. Pendrick, who was behind Kale, made eye contact with the Guardian Knight. He did not know Kale would share such details with the prisoner. However, Kale's next words made Pendrick abruptly turn his gaze back toward Kale. That is why I'm going to share my itinerary with you. Kale, who was seated once again, uncrossed his legs and lowered his head to make eye contact with Balbud. What do you think is the strongest race after dragons? Take a guess. Strongest race after dragons. Kale did not miss Balbud's pupils starting to shake. He could see his smiling face in Balbud's eyes. Damn boy, you look so cool when you smile. After that moment of narcissistic reflection, Kale noticed that Balbud's face was filled with chaos and fear as he continued to speak. I plan to meet with the Whale Tribe. The same Whale Tribe that hates the secret organization and wants to kill all of you. In fact, I'm meeting with the Whale Royalty. Kale heard Ruhan's report as he stared at Balbud's pale face. Human, this swordsman does not have any type of surveillance magic on him. That device from last time was the only one. That meant that nothing Kale said would be leaked to the secret organization. After that, I plan to go meet with a dragon. You know about dragons, right? Darkness descended on Balbud's face. He clearly remembered Kale saying that they would be moving together. Kale stopped smiling as he continued on. They are quite famous for being selfish and violent. Ruhan's shocked voice went off in Kale's head. That is not the case. Of course, there are some dragons who are not like that. That's right. I am a very good dragon that likes to save things. Kale held back his sigh at Ruhan's response before he made eye contact with Balbud, who was staring at him fiercely. This dragon is an ancient dragon who cherishes the World Tree and the elves quite a bit. Kale stood up from the chair. Balbud, who was turning pale for multiple reasons, could see Kale looking down at him with a gentle expression. Kale fixed his clothes before saying one last thing to Balbud. Look forward to it. The next words were directed at Crocs. Cover his eyes and knock him unconscious. Should I paralyze him as well? Yes. Balbud's eyes were slowly covered with a black cloth. Balbud debated whether he should flail around or scream, however, Kale's indifferent gaze made him stay still. He could not even die on his own accord anymore. He could hear the torturer asking Kale something else once he finished placing the blindfold around his eyes. What about a gag? That too? Yes sir. You take care of everything. Just make sure he cannot kill himself, but that he is not relaxed either. Don't overdo it though. Got it? Yes sir. A gag was placed inside Balbud's mouth. Kale peeked at Crocs taking care of Balbud as he turned around. Shall we go? Pendrick and the Guardian Knight slowly nodded their heads at Kala's casual question. The two elves were looking at Kale as if he was an alien, but Kale just shrugged his shoulders. All he did was scare Balbud enough so that he can have a quiet journey until they met with Alberu's aunt, the dark elf, Tasha. Plus, it wasn't like he was lying. Kale asked Pendrick, who had been standing there with a blank expression until they made eye contact. Did you pack your bags? Yes, sir. Then I guess we can go. Kala's true new party member was Pendrick, not Balbud. However, there were people preventing Kala's group from leaving. It was the other elves of the village that Kale managed to avoid during his stay. Do you really have a Dragon Nim's protection? Oh. The half-transparent elementals were causing a ruckus while flying around in front of Kala's eyes. Kale looked toward the one who asked him the question. There were many elves behind that elf with the same expression that was full of anticipation. What a pain! Kale could feel a headache brewing. Chapter 117. It was rare for an elf to approach a human first. They didn't really have any reason to do so. However, the elves of the Ten-Finger Mountain village had found a reason to do so, and were very persistent as they approached the human in front of them. That human, as expected, was Kale. Is it difficult to answer? Kale avoided eye contact with the elf in front of the group. Why did the two elves in the front have to be a grandma and a child? Kale looked toward Chief Canaria. I thought I made it clear that I wanted to leave quietly. Canaria gently smiled toward Kale. Kale found that smile to be annoying, however, this was not her fault. I'm sorry, young Master Nim. I only told my family. Kale turned his gaze toward the source of the apology. Pendrick looked very apologetic. He was the reason that their departure time and location was revealed. However, you could not blame him for telling his family about his departure. Well, in that case, Kale thought that he had at least avoided the worst possible situation with Ra-an showing up and being revered. That was why he decided to use this to his advantage. Wouldn't it be easier to get the elves to do his bidding if he left with a good impression? No, that is not something to be sorry about. A benevolent smile was on Kala's face. That smile allowed Pendrick to let out a sigh of relief. However, Kala's group slowly started to avoid looking at Kale. Kale made eye contact with the young elf who was holding his grandma's hand. No, it is not difficult to answer. He seemed very gentle toward the child. Kale thought about the child's question from before. Do you really have a Dragon Nim's protection? He could see that the elves and elementals all wanted an answer. Some of the elves were looking right at him, while others were off in the distance secretly peeping. Of course, the elementals were glowing and mumbling something, but Kale could not hear them. However, their voices were heard by the elves. This human is protected by a strong aura. It must be a Dragon Nim's aura. I've never felt a Dragon Nim's aura before. I will remember this forever. My goodness! A human that has so many natural auras on him. Fire, water, wind, and wood, all four of these are in different shapes on him. He also has an extra natural power that does not have an affinity. The elementals were currently shouting chaotically. I've never seen such a human before. He's not an elementalist or an elf. I can see why Dragon Nim would like him. He must be a human that is loved by ancient powers, no, by nature. What an interesting human. The elves turned even more pensive after hearing the elementals' words. This was the same for Chief Canaria and the Guardian Knight as well. Only Pendrick did not know about it, as he could not hear the elementals. Kale, who was in the same boat as Pendrick, did not know about the elementals going crazy as he started to speak. The dragon protects the weak me. Ah! Gasps could be heard throughout the crowd. At that moment, Ra-an, who was invisible and stuck on Kala's back, as usual, started to speak into Kala's mind. I'm glad you know, weak human. Kale just ignored Ra-an's comment and started to smile while looking at the elf child. However, that smile soon started to flinch at the child's response. Wow! I'm so jealous! You're the best! You're so cool! The child's triple combo of praise landed on Kale before the child continued to speak. I wanted to go meet you when you were in the World Trees Garden, that flower garden. However, your subordinates were so strict and so I could not go. I've never met such strong people before. They seem to be stronger than even the human royal knights. The child peeked toward the rest of the group as he said that. He then hid behind his grandma, like he was scared. An elf was scared of a human. Just what the hell did they do to protect me for those 3 days? Kale had a feeling that it wasn't him that avoided the elves, but the elves that avoided him because of what Choi Han and crew did during the 3 days that he was unconscious. They just gathered here today to say goodbye to Pendrick. Kale received a few more questions after answering the child's question. The majority of them came from other children. What is Dragon Nim like? Rahan's front paw continued to tap on Kala's back. Kale answered with a gentle smile. I am great and mighty. He is great and mighty. Kale answered as Rahan instructed him to do. Since things ended up like this, wouldn't it be great to be known as the lucky human who received the protection of a great and mighty dragon? He felt like he could see the elf's interest level going up, like he was playing a game. Wow! Is he handsome? Rahan naturally gave him the answer again. Handsome and beautiful. He is handsome and beautiful. Wow! The children's admiration, as well as the adults' nods of approval, continued. Kale wanted to shake his head. They would all fall back and cheer endlessly if a real dragon appeared in front of them. Dragon Nim must be very strong. There is nothing in the world as strong as my body. Of course. He is very strong. Kale answered like a ventriloquist's doll. Rahan's voice started to get louder in his head. I really am the great and mighty Rahan Myru. I am also 1 year older now. Kale was getting a headache from all the noise around him. He still managed to motion to Ron with his eyes however, and Ron stepped forward with Choi Han in order to create a path for Kale. Kale followed the two of them to the entrance of the elf village. An old elf who was with the children that followed Kale to the entrance slowly started to speak. Would it be possible to meet Dragon Nim? I can show up right now. Kale had no plans of letting the elves meet with a dragon. He was planning on using that card in the future when it would be to his benefit. As for now, it was best to leave his identity as the human who was the closest to a dragon. Kale stopped walking and opened up his arms. The elves who were following Kale, as well as the ones peeking from a distance, all listened to Kala's voice. Can't you feel the great and mighty aura of Dragon Nim around us? I believe that all of you elf Nims, the ones who are said to be the closest to nature, would be able to feel this great and mighty aura. Naturally, the older elves and the elementals could feel the aura around Kale. It was as if a dragon was casually roaming around Kale. However, they thought that there was no way a dragon would follow a human around. Unless it was crazy, a dragon would never do that, especially while keeping itself invisible. They believed that they were sensing the dragon's aura that was protecting the human in front of them. Kale observed the elves nodding their heads and continued to speak. I will speak with the Dragon Nim and see if I can create an opportunity for you to speak with Dragon Nim in the future. The elves jerked their heads up only to see a gloomy expression on Kala's face. However, right now, as you all probably know, the village is in a difficult place and many scary things are happening around the continent. I need to quickly leave to deal with some of those things. Some of the elves nodded their heads. These were the ones who were watching Kale from afar. The elf village was a mess. They barely managed to fend off the invaders who were aiming for the branch of the world tree. They did not like the attitudes of the other elves who were praising a human during such a time. It wasn't like Dragon Nim was here. Of course, it was fine to accept and respect a person who has received the protection of a dragon, but they did not like such a happy atmosphere in a time of trouble. While they had such thoughts on their minds, Kala's words reached their ears. They could clearly tell that the human in front of them was the one who had saved them from despair. Kale still kept this gloomy atmosphere about him. They could feel a sense of responsibility on Kala's shoulders. It was solidified even further by Kala's next words. I have a lot to do. These were the tasks that were assigned to me. The adult elves' expressions stiffened at those words. They felt like they knew what Kale was trying to do, even without him telling them. Just like when he had saved their village, and just like they had heard from the chief about the other time when he saved the capital, he probably had similar things to do. He was probably going to sacrifice himself again without seeking any material gain. Kale observed the calmer crowd that was focused on him and started to think. I definitely have a lot of things to do. He needed to trick Tunka and make some profit. He needed to meet with a lot of people. Of course, he didn't know what the order of things would be, but he needed to do everything in the near future. It was nice meeting with all of you, the friends of nature. However, I believe it is time for me to leave. The children who still had a lot of questions seemed disappointed, but the adults consoled them and created a path for Kale. Kale looked back at his group that had stopped to wait for him. The elf healer, Pendrick, seemed to be full of admiration. However, Crocs, Ron, and the kittens were doing their best to hold themselves back from shaking their heads, while Choi Han and Locke were nodding their heads as if they agreed with Kale. Human, this is why I cannot leave you alone. You uselessly weak but very useful human. It was now normal for Kale to ignore Ruan's nonsense. He was right about to start walking again, but soon stopped. The half-transparent elementals that had been chaotically flying around lined up to create a path for him. They looked like lamps lighting up a path. They said something while standing in line, however, Kale had no way of understanding. He just walked down the path in order to leave the village. He's a decent person. It's just disappointing that he is not an elementalist. I want to introduce him to my friend. He reminds me of the ancient heroes my mother told me about. They were said to be similar. I really think he is a good person. I couldn't tell for sure earlier, but he seems very pure. Although Kale would have scoffed if he heard what the elementals were saying, none of the elves were scoffing at their comments. Only Chief Canaria greeted Kale at the entrance with an odd expression on her face. Chief Nim, I will be on my way now. Canaria asked a question instead of saying goodbye. Young Master Nim, you said your family is in the northeast. Yes. She could read the wariness in Kala's eyes. Canaria started to smile, as this Kale was much easier to deal with than the valiant Kale from earlier. Young Master Kale, I believe that you know that you currently do not possess the power of Earth. The Roan Kingdom is the kingdom of boulders, and this is where the power of the Earth is at its strongest. Boulders are the strongest form of Earth. Kale did not hide his thoughts as he made eye contact with Canaria. And Kale did not have any plan of gaining any more ancient powers. He would have all 5 elements of nature if he gained the power of Earth. He had an ominous feeling that doing something like that would lead to a difficult future. Canaria, who noticed Kala's expression stiffening up, carefully handed the book that was in her arms to Kale. Kale did not take it, and instead just looked at her with confusion. She started to explain what the book was about. This is a book that discusses an ancient legend related to the Earth. It is very old. We cannot decipher its meaning at all, however, I feel that you may need this in the future. Kale looked at the book that Canaria was pushing toward him. An ancient legend. That made him want to not take the book. He didn't need it. However, her continued words made Kala's eyes open wide. It is quite a funny legend. A hero with a strong destructive power supposedly was extremely greedy for money. Once that hero died, the hero in this legend is said to have found the wealth of his friend and kept it safe. Canaria snorted. Would a hero be greedy for money? Especially a hero who supposedly saved the world from freezing and did not seek any power, influence, or fame. How could someone like that be greedy for money? Isn't it unbelievable? She looked at Kale for validation. Kale also snorted and nodded his head. Of course. How could a hero be like that? Furthermore, many ancient legends are a mix of lies and the truth. That is often the case. Anyways, this book is about the legend of the other hero, who was both the greedy hero's friend and enemy. This hero seems to be the one who used the power of Earth. Canaria looked toward Kale, who seemed to have a lot on his mind. Kale slowly reached his hand out and Canaria put the book in his hand. To be honest with you, I do not think you will find the ancient power described in this book. However, since we do not need this book, I thought it would be great if it could even help you a little bit, since you helped save our village. It is not a precious book. To be honest with you, no. Canaria thought it might make Kale feel bad, but decided to tell the truth. We have a warehouse where the elves gather things they don't need. I remembered that this book was in that warehouse and brought it over. However, she still thought that this book would not be of much help to Kale. That was because she had gone to the location described in the book, but did not find anything. But since he is lucky, you needed a lot of luck to find ancient powers, to the point that it was said that the heavens determined the owner of each ancient power. However, this human in front of her had enough luck to gather 5 ancient powers. That was why she brought this book over. Kale had an awkward expression on his face as he took the book. I will take it for now, since you say that the elf village does not need it. It is difficult to say no to such generosity. However, ancient powers are not something you can just gain because you want to. Of course. You need the mandate of heaven to get it. But it is still an unbelievable and funny legend, so at least give it a read. Thank you. I will. Kale slowly put the book away and shook hands with Canaria. Let us meet again if it is the will of the heavens, Chief Nim. I hope we can meet together with Dragon Nim next time. Chief. I am right here. Kale ignored Raan's shout and said goodbye to Canaria. He touched the book in his pocket and started to think. There is a reason the fire of destruction appeared near this elf village. He thought that the fire of destruction appeared nearby because this book was in the village. Although it might have been a coincidence, he thought that there might be something there. He recalled what the chief had said. Would a hero be greedy for money? Especially a hero who supposedly saved the world from freezing and did not seek any power, influence, nor fame? How could someone like that be greedy for money? Isn't it unbelievable? Of course, it made sense. Why would it not make sense? Kale had made it rain money for that hero not too long ago. Kale was almost certain that the greedy hero in this book was the owner of the fire of destruction. He also had a feeling that the hero's frenemy was the super rock. Although boulders were just a sub-property of Earth, it was still a part of the Earth. So, the owner of the super rock took the fire of destruction's owner's money. Kale's heart was beating, not because of the ancient power, but because of the money. It didn't matter whether he earned the ancient power or not, but couldn't he just take the money? Kale held back a smirk and said his final goodbye. Goodbye now. Have a safe trip. Kale walked into the half-transparent hut that was the entrance to the illusion magic hiding the elf village. The rest of the group followed behind him. Kale had finally left the elf village for the first time in a few days. He then stopped walking right outside of the boundary. Hey. He let out a sigh. The group slowly turned their gazes away and into the distance at his sigh. Choi Han and Locke let out some fake coughs and lowered their heads, while Ron and B. Crocs still remained calm. On and Hong meowed while in Choi Han's arms before looking away toward a mountain in the distance. Human! Can you see the glorious evidence of our battle? We destroyed it all. Ra'an proudly shouted in Kala's mind. Yes, they really did destroy everything. Kale had wondered why the elf chief had to personally help out with the restoration. But after looking at the site in front of him, it all made sense. There were a lot of trees that were destroyed, and the ground was turned over in many spots. Some boulders also looked like they were cut in half by swords or auras. However, Kale could not say anything. Human, your thunderbolt left the biggest mark. Can you see it? It is a pretty useful power, but do not use it ever again. He could not say anything because he had done the most damage to the land. There was a giant crater on the ground that looked like a meteor had landed. Everything in that crater was completely charred black. Kale looked away toward a distant mountain peak as he started to speak. Let's go. He then asked B. Crocs before using the sound of the wind to move away from the valley. He's not too heavy, right? Yes sir. B. Crocs, who had Balbud on his shoulder, made it look like Balbud did not weigh a pound. Balbud, whose eyes, mouth, and ears were all covered, was still unconscious. Kale verified that everyone was ready before heading out of the valley and toward Bloke village. Although they arrived at the village quickly, he stopped at the foot of the mountain because of Balbud. Young Master Nim. Deputy Butler Hans bowed and greeted Kale. The kittens, On and Hong, jumped out of Choi Han's arms and into Hans's arms. Kale walked past Hans and reached his hand out to someone else. Has it been about 3 months? Yes, young Master Kale. Rosalind, who had returned from the Breck Kingdom, smiled back at Kale. She took a piece of paper out of her pocket in order to respond to Kale's gaze that seemed to be asking how it went. It indicated that Rosalind would be the captain of the Roan Kingdom and Breck Kingdom's Mage Alliance at the beginning of a war. Kale started to laugh as he greeted Rosalind. Welcome back, Miss Rosalind. That's what I wanted to hear. Kale let go of Rosalind's hand before giving an order to Hans. He needed to meet with the Dark Elf, Tasha, once again. Hans, we are first heading to the capital. Chapter 118. Kale met Tasha at an inn outside of the capital. The basement has been completely redone. It was the same inn that Kale had used the last time he was in the capital when he delivered the bracelet to Alberu. Kale had heard that Alberu had purchased this inn. Currently, the ground floor of this building was an inn as usual, while the basement was being used to house the mages. There are a lot of mages. The basement had 3 levels in total, with approximately 30 mages running around getting things done. They all flinched once they saw Kale's group before they respectfully bowed toward Rosalind and then disappeared. Because this was all being done in secret, there were a lot of advanced magic devices throughout the area. The newest defense magic was purchased in order to fortify the basement as well. Tasha, who was the same height as Kale, lifted her head toward Kale and asked. Young Master Kale, isn't this place wonderful? Kale could tell that Tasha was joking, and so he played along. I think our Henitus castle will be much better. Really? Tasha waved her hand and started to laugh. There was no way that was true. This was an area made with the help of the talented mages from the Whipper Kingdom. The Whipper Kingdom was known for their magic devices. There was no way anywhere in the kingdom could match up to the basement in front of them. That was why Tasha knew that Kale was joking. He probably just said that because he loved his home very much. Come on young Master Kale, this is much nicer than the Henitus castle. Although this may not be the best location, it has the newest magic devices. As you already know, the number of magic devices are currently dwindling. Of course, there is an anonymous merchant monopolizing and selling a lot of magic devices. I wonder where he got all of those magic devices from. It was as Tasha said. That was why the fact that Alberu was creating a place for the mages to develop magic devices would be beneficial for the Roan Kingdom in the future. That was also why Tasha was looking at Kale with pride. However, she slowly started to realize something was off. Kale, who was looking back at her, seemed to be half serious with what he had said. Tasha looked toward Rosalind, whom she had seen quite frequently these past few months. Tasha then flinched after seeing Rosalind standing there with an awkward smile. That made Tasha look over at the rest of Kale's group. There was B. Crocs, who was still carrying the paralyzed Balbud, as well as Ron, Choi Han, Lok, On, and Hong. All of them were looking around with indifference. Their unexpected reactions made Tasha look back at Kale, who was smiling. That smile made Tasha become uncertain as she started to speak. Young master. Really? Did the Henitus Castle really have more magic devices than this basement? Although she did not manage to get the whole question out, Kale casually answered back. I'm not joking. Rosalind nodded her head in agreement. Hey. Tasha let out a sigh. The Rhone Kingdom was not known for having a strong presence of magic. But the Henitus territory, the one that was located in the farthest corner of the continent, had all of the newest magic devices? At that moment, Kale approached her and whispered in her ear. Didn't His Highness tell you that he would get a part of the blueprints for a magic tower for you? That was top secret information. Tasha's pupils started to shake before quickly calming back down. Her stiff expression loosened up and she started to laugh. Ha. She brushed her long hair back and asked Kale. I was wondering where he was going to get it from. You will be providing it. Why are you asking such an obvious question? Kale pushed it aside like it was nothing. He really felt that way. It would not make sense for him to not keep the blueprints when he was going to go destroy the magic tower. Currently, the Henitus Castle and the castle walls were almost finished with the renovations. On the surface, Rosalind was in charge of the magic devices, however, the majority of them were made by Ra'an. I don't give him 10 silver coins as an allowance for nothing. He wasn't giving Ra'an an allowance on a whim. He had given it to Ra'an knowing that Ra'an would end up making all of the magic devices for the castle and his ship. Furthermore, it is said to be better to learn about saving money when you are young. Young Master Kale, I want to go visit the Henitus Castle. It is still under renovation. Come visit when it is completed. Really? Kale nodded his head and added on. Yes. Bring Mary with you too. He wanted Tasha to bring him a worker. Tasha let out a sigh-like laugh and vigorously nodded her head. Then I shall properly guide you now. Her gaze headed over to Balbud. She looked at the blindfold and earplugs on Balbud before looking back toward Kale and starting to speak. We spent a ton of money on the underground prison so that he can't run away. Although Tasha had a magic necklace on to make her look human, Kale could see her black pupils and black hair showing. Is that so? We are building a prison as well. I wonder how this one will be. Kale accepted it like it was normal. He followed Tasha down to the 3rd level of the basement. Kale then entered one of the prison cells. It's pretty nice. Isn't it? It'll be a nice place for him to stay. Kale looked around the prison cell. There were multiple cells on this floor, but this specific cell seemed nicer than the others. It looked like a typical room at an inn, but the unique thing about this cell was that all of the corners were rounded. It was built in a circular fashion so as to prevent the prisoner from being able to harm themselves. Kale understood their intent. It looks like you've selected the path of mental torture instead of physical torture. He could see Tasha nodding her head at his words. This was not just any criminal. He was someone with a bit of rank in the organization that was responsible for a terror incident at the capital. There was no way they would treat him like any other criminal. Tisk. Kale clicked his tongue and motioned to B. Crocs, who sat Balbud down on a couch. He then removed the blindfold and the earplugs. Balbud could not stop shaking because of the paralyzing poison. However, he had to open his eyes. Open your eyes. It was because of B. Crocs's cold voice. Balbud had to work hard to be able to open his eyes, and once he did, he saw a nice room that looked kind of odd. There were many eyes looking down at him as he sat there tied up. Tasha looked toward Kale with confusion, as Balbud seemed to be in decent condition. She had heard that Balbud had received a big injury. Her confused gaze made Kale start to speak. He cannot move his lower body. However, we healed the small injuries around his body. You really are too nice, young Master Kale. Tasha shook her head. Balbud could not believe it. They had tortured him with all sorts of poisons every day without killing him. Of course, B. Crocs had done that while saying that he still wanted to learn more about poisons. Kale pretended not to notice the actions of the son who had not forgotten about how his father had lost his left arm. Kale avoided Tasha's gaze, that seemed to be asking how there could be such a soft person. Tasha then turned to look at Balbud when Kale started to speak. If you are planning to use mental torture, should I introduce you to an expert? The excommunicated priestess, Kage, was an expert in mental torture. No thank you. We have our own methods. Kale looked away as Tasha smiled toward Balbud. She really was not just an average dark elf. There was a reason she was responsible for everything in the shadows for Alberu. I look forward to chatting with you in the future. Tasha's gentle voice toward Balbud gave Kale the chills. Kale motioned to Tasha that they should leave the cell after Kale saw Balbud's pale face, and Tasha got up and headed out of the cell with them. Tasha verified that everyone other than Balbud was out before she ordered the guards to guard properly as they headed back up to the surface. She casually asked Kale a question as they walked up the stairs. How were the elves? Kale could hear both curiosity and wariness in her voice. Kale had left Hans and Pendrick at a different inn today. It was because there was a complicated relationship between elves and the dark elves. Kale pretended not to know about that complicated relationship as he answered back to Tasha. Typical elves. Really? You must be their eternal benefactor since you protected their branch of the world tree though. There's also Ruin. Ruin. Tasha, who understood what Kale meant by saying Ruin was there, nodded her head in admiration. They must have treated you like a saint. Kale could not think of anything to say in return. Tasha stealthily asked Kale, whose silence seemed to acknowledge that she was right. Just what are you selling to the Whipper Kingdom that Alberu keeps laughing for no reason when he is alone? His Highness keeps laughing when he is alone. Kale broke him. Kale felt like that scene could be part of a horror movie. Kale did not want to see Alberu laughing like that. Yes. Every time I go to report to him, he's always laughing while saying that he's looking forward to what you are going to do. I guess that's possible. Tasha could see that Kale's smile was similar to Alberu's smile. The two of them really were similar. This made her certain about one thing. It's not something that will benefit the Whipper Kingdom. Of course not. I am a citizen of the Roan Kingdom. That indifferent response made Tasha feel relieved. Tasha, who hid her relief from Kale, opened the door to the surface and cheered Kale on. I hope everything goes well. Let's drink together next time. Sure. Kale, who stepped back onto the surface, could hear Ruin's voice in his head. Is what we are going to do considered a scam? Ruin had heard everything Alberu had discussed with Kale, as well as everything Kale had done to prepare. Technically it is not a scam. It was not a scam. It was just that he was only going to sell half of the item. Either way, I just need to destroy the magic tower as you want. Will you give me 10 silver coins if I do it? Kale whispered back to Ruin, who seemed to be full of anticipation. I'll give you a gold coin. Oh, my lord. The dragon was shocked. Kale started to imagine the show that would play out as they destroyed the magic tower. It sounded like it was going to be quite entertaining. Ruin, who was thinking about getting a gold coin, snapped out of it to ask Kale a question. Kale, who was about to get on the carriage, stopped for a moment after hearing Ruin's question. Are we going to go meet the large whale and the little rat? Kale nodded his head as he got on the carriage. Hans and Pendrick soon joined them in the carriage as they headed toward the Roan Kingdom's northeastern coast, the location of the Yubar Territory's naval base. Kale slowly looked around the Yubar Territory coast that he had not seen for a few months. He sent Ron and B. Crocs to the Cliff of Wines to meet with Widira while Kale moved around with only Choi Han, Locke, and Pendrick by his side. On and Hong chose to head to the residence with Hans, as they did not like water. Human. Of course, Ruin was with Kale. Human, that thing. Ruan called out to Kale a few times, but could not finish his sentence. But Ruan was not the only one. Young Master Nim. Kale Nim. Oh my! Locke, Choi Han, and Pendrick were each at a loss of words as well. Kale could not help but look at that thing while trying to look around the naval base. Good thing we made it so that only those with the proper authorization could enter the base. Thanks to Alberu, who was extremely wary of the Northern Alliance sending some spies, the naval base was under multiple layers of security. That was why Kale was relieved after seeing the thing in front of him. Choi Han pointed toward the Henadis portion of the coast with his finger. Kale Nim, that is a ship, right? Yes, it is a ship. Of course, this was Kala's first time seeing it as well. He had only received reports about how the construction was going through video communication. Choi Han was mumbling like an idiot with a shocked expression on his face. An extremely large ship was in front of his eyes. Anybody will be able to tell that is a Henadis ship. Kale, who was confidently nodding his head, actually, Kim Rok-soo, was relieved after seeing the almost completed ship. It was different compared to the Korean turtle ship that he knew about. I already explained this when it was first mentioned. Choi Han seemed to be just shocked at the size of the ship, rather than thinking about Korea or the turtle ship as Kale had. Unlike the turtle ship on Kala's mind, this ship did not have a turtle shell covering the deck. Instead, the deck was open with turtle shell-shaped walls on either side of the ship. The plan was for many different magic devices to be inside these shell-shaped walls so that they can shoot up into the air. Hey! Kale let out a sigh after seeing the ship. He had underestimated his father and the Henadis family's way of doing things. Run, who had been quiet for a while, finally started to speak again. Human, is that all gold? Is all of that yellow actually gold? All of those shiny things on the ship are gold? Choi Han let out a gasp. It is a golden turtle. The turtle shells on both sides of the ship were gold in color. Furthermore, there was a dashing turtle sculpture at the bow of the ship. Even the ship's mast had a golden turtle on it. All of the gold on the ship was shining brightly underneath the sun. Young Master Nim, I didn't know you were from such a wealthy family. Even Pendrick, who had no desire for materialistic things, could not help but gasp at the large amount of gold on the ship. Kale looked toward them and clarified things. He needed to do so before they got the wrong idea. I want to say this so that all of you do not get the wrong idea. Kale noticed Mueller running over from the shore as well as Widira, Ron, and B. Crocs heading toward them from the Cliff of Wines. He then looked back at the group that was with him and slowly started to speak. They were all waiting to hear what he had to say. It is only gold-plated. It was not completely made of gold. Choi Han and Pendrick looked toward him with shocked expressions, but Kale had said what he needed to say, so he ignored them and greeted Widira, who arrived before Mueller. Long time no see. Yes, young Master Kale. Have you been well? Contrary to Widira's happy greeting, she did not look well. I've been well, but you don't seem too good. Kale asked about it right away, since he didn't like to beat around the bush. Widira nodded her head as if she had expected this and started to speak. She also did not want to waste time beating around the bush. She got right to the point. We ended up getting tangled up with the eastern continent because of the mermaids. At that moment, Ron and B. Crocs looked toward Widira. The eastern continent was their hometown and a place that Kale did not know much about. We gathered a lot of information thanks to that, but there is something that is difficult for us to do. I came while hoping that you might be able to help us. You want to ask me for a favor? Not a favor, but an exchange of information. Kale had expected this. It would not be something small, since the whale tribe said they would come in person. However, he could not feign ignorance and avoid them. He needed to know what was going on so that he could avoid any headaches. He was certain that it was related to the secret organization. If it was too difficult for Kale to deal with, he planned on passing it off to someone else, like the elves, Alberu, or even the gold dragon. Speak. Kale motioned for Widira to continue. She cautiously started to speak again. The ones who gave us this information were the members of the race that was known for being the strongest race in the eastern continent. Strongest race. Although that caught Kalas' attention, he focused more on the was known for being portion that seemed to describe it as something from the past. He felt a chill run down his back, even though there was no breeze. The Tiger tribe was at the point of being obliterated because of that organization. We happened to run into their shaman. The Tiger tribe. Kale did not hear anything else Widira had to say. He blanked out the moment she said, Tiger tribe, and blinked his eyes a few times. The Tiger tribe. Kale asked to see if he had heard correctly. However, Widira thought that he had not heard correctly and stopped what she was saying to confirm. Yes, the Tiger tribe. Just the name alone made it sound like it would be one of the strongest races in the eastern continent. They apparently also had a shaman. Chapter 119. Kale couldn't help but wonder. Do I have some unknown affinity with animals? He could not understand why he kept getting tangled up with so many different types of beast people. Furthermore, they were all beast people who were either struggling or in danger. It's not like I'm running an animal hospital or something. Kale looked around him. Ron and B. Crocs were already standing by Widira and Kale so that they could see if anybody was approaching them. They really were a sharp father-son duo. Kalas' gaze turned back toward Widira. What is the information that you want to trade? Widira used her tongue to lick her lower lips after seeing Kalas' gaze. Her mouth was going dry after seeing how Kale looked like he had no interest at all in her information. However, Kalas' mind was just in a state of chaos right now. What a mess it would be if I get tangled up with tigers too. Kale was thinking about how horrible the future would be as Widira finally started to speak. Actually, you do not necessarily need to give us any information. It is us sharing information with you. Kalas' expression became odd. Nothing in life was free. He continued to stare at Widira before he proceeded to speak. I'll at least listen to what you have to say. Widira nodded her head and started to speak. She recited the information she had gathered while patrolling the eastern continent's coast. The organization you mentioned before, ARM, has taken full control of the eastern continent's underworld. Ron's eyes headed toward Widira's lips. The Tiger tribe discovered that a portion of ARM had crossed over to the western continent. While gathering more information about that, they learned that a large number of experts have already arrived on the western continent. Kale nodded his head. It made sense. The magic spearman, the blonde sword master, all of them were rare experts. Widira observed Kale nodding his head as she continued to speak. And they discovered that ARM's first battle brigade, one of their many battle brigades, will conduct a large-scale move in the near future. Kale, who was just blankly nodding his head, stopped moving. What did you say? Kale wondered if he had heard correctly. What is coming over? The first battle brigade. The Tiger tribe is certain that the entire brigade is getting ready to move. Where? Here. The western continent. Yes, the western continent. Oh. Kale was at a loss for words after hearing this information that was much larger in scale than he had expected. He then raised his hand to cover his neck because it was getting the chills. Widira noticed the worried expression on Kalas' face. I knew he would worry about it. She started to feel warm thinking that Kale was seriously worried about the western continent. However, Kale was worried about himself, not the continent. Young Master Kale, that is why. That is why. There's more. Kale looked toward Widira, who brought over information he did not want, like he was looking at a ticking bomb. However, Widira continued to speak, as if she was trying to resolve the concern on Kalas' mind. The Tiger tribe and the whales are currently running around gathering more information. The Tiger tribe expects the brigade to move this winter. Kale started to frown. Widira had said that the tiger tribe was close to extinction because of Arm. So why were they poking their noses around digging up information? Were they aiming to get revenge? The tiger tribe had a suggestion for us when they shared that information with us. Kale quickly started to speak. He had a feeling that he should not hear the details of their suggestion. I see. So, what is the information you want from me? That was his way of trying to brush it aside. However, it was for naught, as Widira nodded her head and described the suggestion. What they suggested was that, the moment the first battle brigade reaches the center of the ocean, Kale started to frown and looked down at Widira's waist. Tap. Tap. Widira was caressing the whip wrapped around her waist as she slowly continued to speak. We kill them all. Kale let out a deep sigh. He finally understood why the secret organization worked with the mermaids in order to try to take control of the sea route. It was so that they could move their members to the western continent safely. Every word that Widira was saying sounded like thunder in Kala's ears. The tiger tribe thinks we should get rid of them and leave no traces behind. The ocean will be advantageous for us because we will be able to reduce the number of injuries on our side, as well more easily capture some prisoners to pry out more information. Really? Yes. It is a very entertaining plan. Hoo-hoo. Widira's laugh roamed around Kala's head. They're so scary. Arm was one of the branches of the secret organization. That meant that their first battle brigade would be very strong. For that reason, Kale did not want to get involved with this oceanic battle. That was why Kale asked his earlier question once again. So, what is the information that you want from me? Widira did not respond right away. She peeked at Kale for a bit, before cautiously starting to speak. The tiger tribe is looking for some information in return for spying on Arm until winter time. To be honest with you, we want to provide them with that information if possible, because we need to get revenge on that organization as well. Kale just silently stared at Widira instead of answering. Widira then continued to speak. It actually isn't a very difficult piece of information to get. However, I thought you would have more knowledge about it than us. Knowledge. Kale did not hide his wariness at the fact that the word, information, had changed to, knowledge. However, Widira slowly started to explain what she needed. They are looking for a large area that does not have many people. As for the temperature, the cooler it is, the better. Furthermore, they need a forest, and it would be best if there isn't any ruling power in the area. But it still needs to have a way to connect with the human world so that they can exchange any necessary items. Welp, we all know where they will be staying. Kale could not understand why the tiger tribe would need such information. Why do they want to know about such a place? So that the tiger tribe can move there. Ah! In that case, there is a... Kale could not finish his sentence as he looked toward Widira. What are the tigers trying to do? Yes, it makes sense they want information on such a location because they want to move. That is why I was hoping you might know of a suitable place. Kale could not say anything. Did he know of such a place? A place without people nor a ruling power. Cool, but not cold, along with a forest. At the same time, has easy access to trade with humans. Ruhan's voice shouted out in his head. He sounded like a contestant on a game show who was about to answer the winning question. There is such a place. The Forest of Darkness. Kale naturally ignored Ruhan's answer. I'm not sure. I can't think of anywhere right now. Why did he ignore Ruhan? Would Widira be asking because she doesn't know the answer? The reason she was asking like this was because she wanted Kale to be the one to bring up the Forest of Darkness. Really? See? Widira's expression right now was one that seemed to be saying that she knows Kale knows the answer to her question. She desperately seemed to want Kale to say it. Human, you don't know? I do. Just repeat after me. Forest of Darkness. Nope. Not doing it yet. I can't think of anywhere right now. Kal's expression seemed realistic. He really seemed like he didn't know. Widira lightly bit down on her lips before nodding her head. In that case, could you let us know if you remember such a place next time we meet? Sure. I'll do that. Kale had no plans of doing that. She's going to ask me to let the tigers live there if I say the Forest of Darkness. Of course, the whale tribe would not ask for that favor without compensation. They would probably compensate him fairly, however, Kale did not want that. Taking in the tiger tribe that wants to get revenge on the secret organization was like jumping in front of a train. Well, it would be beneficial to have the tigers with us when the northern nights come down. But he still didn't think this was the right answer. He already had a wolf battle squad. By the time Kale organized his thoughts, Widira started to say something else. Oh, the organization is going to send a couple of people across the ocean first in an attempt to find a sea route where they can avoid us. She sounded very casual. Kale immediately asked back. You're just going to let them do that? Yes. We will just observe them. The reason for this was obvious. Kale immediately answered back. You want to see where they go? Yes. He knew that was the case. The whales probably wanted to know where they were headed. Those members probably wouldn't head right to ARM's western base, but they should be able to gather some information about it. Alright, work hard. That was what he wanted to say before ending the conversation. However, he looked around, feeling a lot of gazes on him. Agu, Ron, B. Crocs, Choi Han, Locke, and even Pendrick. Although Rosalind, Hans, An, and Hong were not here, the majority of his battle strength were all staring at him. All of them were people who had negative feelings about ARM. But it is still too much. Kale found it odd that their level of anger seemed to have increased, however, he could only start to speak again after seeing Ron and Choi Han's cold gazes. Yes, work hard. You'll share the information with me. Of course. Good. Choi Han was staring at him and Widira. He looked like he was ready to pick up his sword and run wild. Ron was clenching his dagger tightly. Does that old man still hold a grudge for his arm? However, the cowardly Kale ended up having to say one more thing. Ahem, let me know as soon as you find out where they are going. Kale peeked around once more. Choi Han nodded his head in satisfaction, while Ron started to smile and mumble. I need to make them cough up blood and starve to death. Such scary words. Kale, who had coughed up blood and starved after using the fire thunderbolt, started to shiver after hearing those words. He then started to think. These people really are too much for a coward like me to handle. Young Master Kale. What is it? Widira pointed to a spot behind Kale. Her action made Kale turn around, only to see the golden turtle shell shining in the sun. Is that your ship? Widira's voice was shaking. Kale did not know this as he nodded his head. Yes. To be more accurate, it is a ship that belongs to our territory. You figured it out right away. Kale pointed to Mueller, who was fidgeting off to the side without being able to approach them. He made it. Flick. Kalas flicked his index finger as a signal for Mueller to approach, and Mueller quickly ran over. This dwarf and rat half-blood was still short, but he had gotten a bit plump. Young Master Nim, great to see you again. Have you been well? Hee. Mueller, who was smiling as he greeted Kale, was much less scared than before. Kale was shocked, but he liked it like this. This was better than having Mueller being scared of everything. Yes, I have been well. An and Hong want to see you. The four of us will have dinner together at some point. Hiccup. Mueller suddenly started to hiccup. His shoulders closed in as he cautiously started to speak. Did the two respected kitten Nims come with you? Yes. They keep talking about you. They must be really excited to see you again. Müller's face became pale. Kale did not care about this as he introduced Müller to Widira. He is a dwarf and rat half-blood and is extremely talented. Right, Müller? Both Widira and Kale turned to look at Müller. Müller flinched after seeing Widira's beauty, before vigorously nodding his head and starting to shout. Yes sir. This ship is designed to have the strongest offensive capabilities and will dominate the seas in the future. You will never be able to find another ship like this. Widira nodded her head. Even she could tell that the golden ship in front of her had extremely strong defense. Although she could not tell how strong the offensive capabilities of the ship will be, she knew that it would be completed properly, since Kale was in charge of it. Young Master Kale really has good foresight. Widira was amazed at how Kale was already ready for naval warfare. Young Master Kale, you really are amazing. Me? Yes. Müller stopped talking once he saw that Widira and Kale were chatting with each other once again. He wanted to explain that this ship had the greatest defense in the world, however, he did not have the moment to do that. As he stood there disappointed, Kale asked him a question. The blueprints for the villa. Ah, they are almost completed, sir. Kale started to smile. Kale was talking about the blueprints for Kala's new villa that would be built on the Yubar coast. It was a house that would allow him to safely enjoy the slacker life, even during a war. The details of this dream house were being described by Müller. I plan to expand the basement as much as possible while being as sturdy as possible. It will also have an extremely strong defense. Pat, pat. Kale leaned over to pat the short Müller on the shoulder. You'll need to give it your all to make it. Yes sir. I will definitely get it done. Good. I will trust you. The word, trust, made Müller turn even more pale. However, Widira was amazed. Although they are calling it a villa, it sounds more like he is making a secret base. A sturdy building with a large basement. It was perfect for a secret base. Widira could see the others behind Kale as well. Choi Han continued to nod his head with a smile on his face. The others seemed pretty relaxed as well. They really are special. Widira did not share her thoughts as she turned to speak to Kale, who was finished speaking to Müller. Will you be leaving tomorrow? That is the plan. It was almost 1 year since Kale had last visited the Whipper Kingdom. But there was one other thing Kale needed to do before heading back. Kale returned to the Magic Tower right before a year had gone by. Young Master Nim, we're glad to see you again after such a long time. Kale shook the hand of the person in front of him. This was the former liege of the Magic Tower's secret son, the one who was the child of a Whipper Kingdom citizen and a mage, the unfortunate person who could not use mana. He was the crazy bastard who was one of Tunka's top advisors. The man in front of Kale was Harel Kodiang. Harel, long time no see. The man who had a total hatred of magic seemed much better than a year ago. Where is Tunka? I am right here. Kale let go of Harel's hand and looked toward the sound of the voice. Screech. The rusty iron gate opened and the large Tunka walked out of the building. Tunka was coming out of the Magic Tower. This building, which was a reminder of the terrible past for the Whipper Kingdom's citizens, was surrounded by weeds. You became the Commander-in-Chief. Ha ha ha. Yes, I am the Commander-in-Chief. Tunka laughed at Kala's statement and answered back with excitement. His eyes were sparkling as he looked at Kale. That is why I want to end this reminder of the past before I start working as the Commander-in-Chief. Tunka definitely gave off the vibe of a crazy bastard. Tunka pointed toward the Magic Tower behind him as he asked Kale. You will destroy it, just as you promised. Part of the deal last year was that Kale would destroy the Magic Tower. Tunka looked like he would kill Kale if Kale did not plan to hold up his end of the deal. Of course, that could never happen because of Choi Han and the others behind Kale, but that would be what Tunka would want to do. You see. Kale started to speak. Neither Tunka nor Kale had changed much in this past year. Kale then continued on with his usual indifference. I am someone who keeps my word. Both of them started to smile. I'll make it quite the sight. And I'll make a profit in the process. The value of the documents and the seed he had found in the underground lab last year had gone up by quite a bit. Ka ha 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 ha. Tunka let out a loud laugh. He seemed to like Kala's words quite a bit. At that moment, Ra'an started to speak into Kala's head. Human. Human. You know. Kale flinched at Ra'an's sudden words. He always got uncomfortable whenever Ra'an acted like this. What was he planning to say this time? To be honest with you, I enjoy breaking things. That is why I am very excited right now. Let's blow it away. Ra'an was excited while thinking about blowing up this historic monument. Ra'an's statement actually made Kale start to smile. We're actually thinking the same thing for once. Ra'an and Kale were both feeling the same way. Honestly speaking, Kale was excited as well. He was excited about the show that would soon take place. Chapter 120. Although Kale was excited, seeing Tunka laughing like a lunatic was still not a pleasing sight. You'll break it tomorrow. Tunka looked like a kid wanting to know what his birthday present was as he asked Kale the question. That was why Kale decided to heighten Tunka's expectations. No. What? Tunka, as well as Harel and the other chiefs, all stiffened up. Kale looked at their stiff expressions and gave a refreshing answer. Breaking is too light of a word. I will destroy it completely. What? Ah ha 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 ha. Kale could see Tunka laughing maniacally before walking over to the base outside of the magic tower with his arms open wide. Many soldiers came over to greet Tunka as he started to shout. Did you hear? This symbol of hate will soon disappear. A new history of the Whipper Kingdom will soon begin. Boom! 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 The soldiers started to stomp their feet and cheer. I'm getting tired of this. Kale was tired of their barbaric ways. Harel Kodiang suddenly approached him and peeked toward Choi Han, Locke, and Rosalind, who were all standing behind Kale, before starting to speak to Kale. Young Master Nim, you must have been shocked at the number of soldiers here. We were training nearby and brought everyone over after learning that you were heading our way. Training nearby? What a load of bullshit. Kale was certain that they brought the soldiers over to raise their morale from watching the magic tower go down. But Kale didn't really care about that. He slowly started to speak. I guess that makes sense. It's fine if more people come over. It'll be quite a show. Of course, Kale was someone who worked hard, even for things he didn't really care about. Everybody is gathering to watch the explosion? Oh, they will know the greatness of my magic bomb. It would be better if more people were around to see it. Harel started to observe Kale after seeing how calm Kale was. This was someone who knew his secret. However, a whole year had gone by without Kale blackmailing him nor even asking for anything. He then came back to complete his end of the deal from last year. By the way, how will you destroy the magic tower? Magic? Excuse me. Kale started to smile after seeing Harel's shocked expression. Kale was planning to use magic in front of people who hated magic? What? How else would you destroy it? Harel looked toward Kala's hand that was now on his shoulder. Pat, pat. The hand that was patting his shoulder suddenly stopped moving as Kale started to speak again. Isn't it quite entertaining to destroy the magic tower, the symbol of magic, using magic? Harel turned to look at Kale after hearing his jovial tone. Stay in your lane. Your part of the deal was that it was up to me what I did with the magic tower and how I destroy it. Kala's tone implied that he would not allow them to step out of their lane again. Harel could see Kale and his group. Choi Han had easily taken care of Tunka the last time that they were here. The rest of them seemed to be almost as strong as him. Those experts were staring at him and Kale. Kale quietly whispered in Harel's ear. You're also not in a place to tell me what to do. Harel let out a sigh. The man who knew the secret of his birth came back after a year to shove it in his face while telling him to stay in his lane. Harol's gaze started to slowly turn colder. This was the Whipper Kingdom, his territory. However, Kale continued to speak at that moment. You have this kingdom in your hands and live however you want. I'm the same way. Harol's gaze, that was turning colder by the second, suddenly turned into confusion. I'm the same way. That sentence echoed over and over in his ears. He looked up and made eye contact with Kale, who continued on in a pleasant tone. I'll stay in my lane, so you stay in yours. Harol, whose physical appearance made him look like a good person, slowly started to smile before he finally ended up laughing. Ha, ha ha. He laughed for a while until he noticed Tunka returning toward them and finally greeted Kale with a smile. You are still the same, young Master Kale. That is why I am even happier to see you again. Of course. I am still a lover of peace. Once again, you have that smile you have when you meet with the Crown Prince. Kale ignored Ruan's comment and made eye contact with the still excited Tunka. However, Tunka's gaze was pointed at Choi Han, who was standing behind Kale. Want to fight again? It'll be fun to beat up a commander-in-chief. Choi Han's gaze seemed to be full of annoyance as he brushed aside Tunka's provocation. Tunka did not cower at Choi Han's comment and instead seemed to get even more excited as he started to mumble. He smells like he's gotten even stronger. Kale's shoulders flinched. Choi Han became even stronger. He slowly turned his head to look at Choi Han, who slightly bowed his head. I am always working hard to protect everyone. Why? You're already super strong? Why do you need to do that? Based on what Miss Widira said, I believe it was the right decision. Choi Han's pure yet chilly smile was visible to Kale. He quickly turned his head away. I have a bad feeling about this. He was worried that Choi Han wanted to participate in the Tiger Tribe and Whale Tribe's attack to decimate the secret organization's 1st Battle Brigade. Kale knew that he just needed to turn around and ask Choi Han to find out the answer, however, he could not do so. He had an ominous feeling. That was why he chose to change the topic of conversation. He casually started to speak to Tunka. Tunka, how about a celebration tonight? A celebration? Kale feigned excitement and responded back to this idiot who did not seem to understand. Yes. A pre-celebration of the destruction of the magic tower. What do you think? Haha. I like it. You really are not like those rotten nobles. You know a thing or two. Know a thing or two. I guess I know that you are on a train to hell. This fool was planning on charging into the Empire instead of attacking the jungle first. Kale observed Tunka, who was happily telling the chiefs to plan a celebration. He then slowly looked toward his group and started to speak. Let's rest a bit. They needed to rest now so that they could move around at night. Night soon arrived. Kale had a look of doubt on his face as he looked down. Choi Han and Rosalind were talking about the bombs they would use tomorrow on one side of the tent while Kale just continued to look down with his arms crossed. This is very doubtful. Not at all. We can do a good job. She's right. Nuna, Run, and I are the best. I am great and mighty. On, Hong, and Run all shouted in a row. However, this only made Kale frown even more. He didn't know whether they could do it. But it's not like I can take out the people who are supposed to participate in the celebration. Choi Han, Locke, B. Crocs, Rosalind, Ron, Pendrick, and Kale were all scheduled to celebrate with Tunka. The Red Kitten, Hong, confidently stepped forward and stood in front of Ra'an and On as he opened up his chest. The three of us can even destroy a castle. That was technically true, since Ra'an alone was enough to do that. But Kale was worried that they would just cause a mess without doing things properly. Kale kicked the large box next to him. Dong! The box sounded like it was full. The items that they had found last year in the underground research lab were inside this box. A mana storage device that uses the principles of ancient powers. The reason for developing magic resistance. It included the research documents for those two topics. Furthermore, there was a seed as well. Of course, these were only half of the things Kale had gained from the lab. To be specific, it was the half that was useless. You need to put this back there properly. Got it. Kale could see the 5-year-old Ra'an click his tongue and let out a sigh. Weak human, we are stronger than you. Stop nagging. Ho! Kale couldn't believe it. However, An and Hong nodded in agreement as well. Ra'an flicked his front paw and the large box floated up into the air and turned invisible. We'll be back. Human, you are weak, so don't drink too much. Kale was full of disbelief and could not say anything. Hong approached him and patted Kala's foot with his front paw. We'll be back really fast. Can I play hide and seek with Nuna and youngest bro inside of the magic tower once we're done? Sure. Hong and Ra'an snickered as they stealthily left the tent, while An patted Kala's thigh so as to tell him that she will take care of it. She then slowly left the tent as well. Kale brushed his face with both hands. He knew that they would get it done properly, so why was he feeling so iffy? However, Kale ended up feeling a different kind of iffiness after seeing the next person who came into his tent. Excuse me, young Master Nim. Yes. Will we be heading to the lair after this? The Gold Dragon's lair, where an ancient dragon lives. Just thinking about it made it hard to breathe. Of course. He had to go there. How could he not when Ra'an, the strongest member of their team, wanted to go? Then I will contact Gold Dragon Nim in advance. I'm sure he'll be very happy. Sure. Young Master Nim. Do you think that once we get there? What? The handsome elf seemed embarrassed. Kale was starting to get impatient when Pendrick cautiously started to speak once again. Do you think that I will be able to meet the Dragon Nim protecting you as well once we get there? Yes, you'll be able to meet him. I see. I'm sure that I am the only elf who will get to meet 2 Dragon Nims at once. Kale nodded his head with an indifferent expression on his face. Life forms like this that were super energetic and pure really did not mesh well with him. I guess so. Oh, and will we meet the person I am to heal on our way back? Kala's expression became serious. Yes, we will meet them afterward. Yes sir. I understand. He had asked Tasha to contact Mary when he met Tasha at the capital. Tasha had looked toward Kale with a warm gaze when he had told her it was regarding getting rid of Mary's pain, but Kale had pushed the memory aside, as he had found Tasha's warm gaze to be annoying. Then I will not disturb you any longer, as it is already so late. Pendrick did not use transformation magic, instead, he just lowered his hood in order to cover his ears as he headed out of the tent. Kale let out a sigh and looked toward the 2 people still in the tent. Choi Han noticed his gaze and started to smile awkwardly. How is it going? You see. It was rare to see Choi Han answering like this. However, Kale did not give Choi Han even a moment to answer, as he sternly responded. You must make sure to do a good job. Yes, Kale Nim. Kale heard Choi Han's weak response before pointing toward the entrance of the tent. I guess it is time we join in on the drinking. Sure, young Master Kale. As you say, Kale Nim. Kale opened up the flap of the tent and headed out. He could hear laughter and singing throughout Tunka's base, even though it was late at night. Kale looked in the opposite direction for a moment. The children, who now averaged 8 years old, were probably working hard right now. Kale hoped that Tunka's group would celebrate even more as he walked toward them. The next morning after the celebration, the day that the magic tower would disappear into history was finally here. Kale looked up at the magic tower with his arms crossed. The magic tower was known for having 20 floors above ground and 3 floors underground. It no longer had the extravagance it used to have in the past. All that stood in front of him was a rusty building filled with the aura of death. Kahihi, I'm looking forward to this. Kale looked over to his side and made eye contact with Tunka. Tunka, who still looked a bit hungover, was smiling. Although someone might think that he was crazy, his gaze was still sharp. Our citizens, a large number of our brothers, were killed because of that magic tower. I'm a bit disappointed that you are destroying it with a magic bomb, but that's entertaining as well. You are right, Commander Tunkanim. Our history will soon begin. Harald Kodiang added on from Tunka's side. There were many soldiers stomping the ground and banging the ends of their spears on the ground with anticipation. Kale Nim. Choi Han approached Kale at that moment. We are ready. Really? Kale's gaze headed back to the magic tower. A couple of black magic bombs were placed around the tower. This is the great and mighty Ra'an's newest magic bomb. This was Ra'an's magic bomb, version 5 years old. I will detonate it once you give the signal. Rosalind gathered her mana and waited for Kale's command. Rosalind, who had been using magic to disguise herself since coming to the Whipper Kingdom, was calm. Kale looked toward Tunka and started to speak. We'll detonate it soon. Wouldn't it be good to let the soldiers know? Kahihi, you think so? Tunka walked over to his soldiers and opened up his arms. He looked like he had something to say again. Kale, who was not interested at all in what Tunka had to say, walked over to Rosalind in order to give the order. However, Harald started to approach him. Harald, the secret son of the Magic Tower's liege. Harald looked toward Kale and gently started to speak. You must be disappointed, young Master Kale. About what? You didn't manage to get anything out of the Magic Tower, and even have to blow it up after doing nothing with it for a year. I definitely am disappointed. Not really. I'm very excited. Kale had a bitter smile on his face as he casually responded back. I'll just treat it as throwing some money away. You know that I am rich. You definitely look like a noble when you say something like that. You bet I am. Don't forget it. Kale could feel the ground start to shake as he said that. Boom. 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 Oh oh, oh oh, oh oh. The soldiers started to stomp their feet once again as they started to chant. Kale turned to look at them and ended up making eye contact with Tunka. He then raised his hand after seeing Tunka's excited expression. Do it. I am starting the 5-second countdown. Mana started to fluctuate in Rosalind's palm. 5. The soldiers started to stomp even harder once she started the countdown. 4, 3, 2. Rosalind, Kale, Choi Han, Ron, and B. Crocs all looked at each other. The mana shot out of Rosalind's palm and rushed toward the magic bombs. 1. Explode. Bang. Bang. Ba-a-a-a. Multiple sounds of explosions echoed throughout the area. It was so loud that you couldn't even heard the soldiers stomping their feet. This is so exciting. Very exciting. We can destroy it entirely since nobody will get hurt. Ra'an was excited about this. Ruhu-yu-yu-yu-umble. The magic tower is breaking down. The magic tower started to crumble while causing a dust storm. The dust storm rushed toward the group, even though they were all standing outside the range of the explosion. Mew ha 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 ha. It's destroyed. It's done. Kale could hear Tunka's laughter and the cheers of the citizens who had been oppressed by magic. Kale turned his gaze to his side again. Crazy bastard. Harald was smiling to the point that it looked like his mouth might rip. This was the case, even though he was trying to hold himself back from smiling. Harald looked excited as he looked toward Kale. You are smiling as well, young Master Nim. Kale was smiling as well. Yes. That was refreshing. It was refreshing watching the magic tower crumble. Kale was smiling while watching this sight that the majority of the continent's mages would cry and lament about. But how could he not? Creak. The magic tower started to tilt to the side, starting from the second floor. Boom. It finally tilted completely to the side and crumbled to the ground. Cough, cough. Damn it, so much dust. Kale covered his mouth with a handkerchief to shield against the dust. Human, did you catch a cold? Kale ignored Ruin's nonsense as he looked toward the magic tower that was covered in dust. The destroyed magic tower slowly revealed itself. Boom. 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 Oh oh. Oh oh. Oh oh. The soldiers became even more excited. Kale felt the excitement behind him as he slowly approached the destroyed magic tower. Choi Han and the others walked in first. Are you trying to take a look at the remains? Harold snickered as he approached Kale. Yes, I want to take a look. Kale smiled and moved to the side, as if he was inviting Harold to walk with him. The two men, who were excited for completely different reasons, slowly walked into the dust cloud. Finally, they could see what remained of the magic tower. Pfft! Harold closed his mouth in order to hold back his laughter. The 20-story magic tower was gone, and they could only see the remains on the ground. You must be very happy. Harold nodded his head without looking at Kale. He was so happy that it could not be explained with words. He had longed to see this for such a long time. Magic would never enter the Whipper Kingdom ever again. This brought Harold immense amounts of joy. At that moment, he could hear Kala's calm voice. I'm happy as well. Harold felt odd hearing Kala's comment. Kale didn't seem like he was just playing along with him. He really sounded like he was happy. Harold slowly turned to see Kale smiling. At that moment, they heard someone's voice. Hey! It was Choi Han. Kala's eyes started to get cloudy. The show was about to start. Choi Han pointed to the underground that was visible through the broken part of the first floor. Yes, down there, in the now slightly visible secret fourth floor underground, was the box that Ruin and crew had moved last night. Kale was waiting to hear Choi Han's script that would signal the start of the show. The words that Choi Han had been practicing for many days slowly started to come out. What? Island. This? Island. Odd. Should I report this to Kale Nim? Ah, what terrible acting. While Kale wanted to grab Choi Han by the collar, B. Crocs pushed Choi Han back and looked down where Choi Han was looking at. There is something there. Like a good assassin, B. Crocs's acting was fabulous. B. Crocs looked toward Kale. The majority of the documents were destroyed by the explosion, leaving behind only the slightest amount of research documents. Kale had said it like this on purpose. B. Crocs started to speak. Young Master Nim. It was now Kala's turn.